Episode 563, Unconventional Project-Based Learning that Engages Students.
The 10-Minute Teacher Podcast with Vicki Davis. Every weekday, you'll learn powerful, practical ways to be a more remarkable teacher today.
So today we're talking with Noa Daniels, an educator from Canada. And Noa, we're going to talk about engaging learners in unconventional ways. What do you mean by unconventional ways?
Well, I think that there are a lot of wonderful things about teaching, and there are a lot of confines in teaching. So I think that there are ways that we can build skill and help students learn and grow together by building outside the blocks, which is where Bob came from.
Okay, because you work with Bob or building outside the blocks. But give me an example. What's one of the greatest unconventional ways to engage learners you've seen recently?
Well, I create projects. So although they seem conventional, they're projects where students choose the day that they present, they choose what tool they want to share their learning, and they get to use opportunities like this to find and be themselves in school. So for example, my podcast, the Personal Playlist Podcast, came from my classroom, and it's called the P3, but there it's called the Personal Playlist Project. So students bring 3 songs, a nostalgic song, a song that reflects their identity, and a song that lifts them up, picks them up, inspires or motivates, and they share it with the class. And sometimes they use different kinds of tools to share that. They usually start in Google Slides. A lot of them use iMovie to kind of put it all together, and they tell the story of themselves through these songs. But the reason why it's unconventional is because you have to really think about how this is a high-level critical thinking activity. Because if you say, well, it's 3 songs, you think, oh, no big deal. But you hear, if you listen to my podcast, the educators sometimes take weeks or even months to think through their 3 songs because it's the totality of them in this playlist. So it's an amazing opportunity to get students writing, reflecting, presenting, and developing their skills with the critical thinking lens.
Okay, so they come up with 3 songs and they put it on your podcast, right? Or is it educators? Help me understand.
The podcast came from my classroom. I have been doing this for a long time. And when Stephen Hurley at Voice Ed Radio said, Noah, you have a podcast in you, I'm like, what if we take this project from my class? So when I'm running through a project like this, let's say it's an 8-week cycle. So I'll introduce the project and students work on their own time. I call it work at home instead of homework, because in view of the deadline that they selected within that 8-week time frame, and usually I give 2 weeks of a start, I give students the opportunity to choose the day that they want to present. And some students say, okay, well, I want to go first. I want to be original, or I want to go last. And some students say, I need to see some exemplars before I go. And I think the reality that makes it unconventional is so many times teachers give a due date and say it's fair if everybody gets to do it on the same day. But because learning is a process, not an event, every person kind of needs their own timeline in order to prepare for things and think through the best ways to do the kind of work that they want to do. So they're ready and they feel fantastic. You pick when you're presenting, and then I go on and I teach. So for about 15 minutes during that time, I have no more than 3 presenters in a given day. And it only takes that minimum amount of time in school, but the students spend hours and hours outside of school because it's a project that's about them. And they love talking about themselves, especially when you're teaching middle school. But it's just all of my projects have those common themes that students get to choose how and when they present within the teacher allotted time frame. That when students present, the class is an active audience that asks questions or provide comments or critiques to the presenter and kind of coach the presenter while I'm sitting back and joyfully seeing them articulating the success criteria on the rubric and really helping each other. And by the end, they all reflect. And one of the things that I find profound about the projects, and I guess unconventional, is how much students express the joy of learning from each other, especially about things in their lives. Some of them have been in school together for almost 10 years, and they don't know these things about each other. So whether it's the P3 or it's the What's in a Name project or Healthy Start, which we just finished, it's an incredible way to see pieces of students while also building a bevy of skills.
I'm just curious, when you have an 8-week project, are they presenting across the whole 8 weeks? You know, because some folks say, oh, well, all the kids would pick the last day. Is that true or false?
Usually the same kinds of people choose the first couple dates. They either want to get it over with or they're so excited and they just spend tons of time getting ready. Most students want to hang back and see a few presented before they feel good enough to present. And this is the great part about revisiting projects, is that if I do 5 Building Outside the Blocks projects in a year, by the 3rd time my students revisit this idea of a Bob, they're like, you know what? I tried being a procrastinator. It didn't didn't help my grades. Maybe this time I'll try to go first. And you hear them having this dialogue with themselves when they're choosing their dates. And it gives them a real chance to develop organizational thinking and self-management skills.
Okay, so you've mentioned a couple of projects, and we've talked about the pick and the three, but you've also mentioned what's in a name and a healthy start. Tell us about your next one that you want to talk about.
So what's in a name I usually use at the beginning of the year, and kids look up their names. They ask their parents the story of why their names were chosen for them, the etymology, and they build the story however they want to tell it of what their name means to them. One of my students got to present for a large audience of 600 people because of, I guess, how she utilized this project. And my principal was so excited that now my entire school, every single grade from JK to 8, are actually doing the What's in a Name project, and we're recording it for The Story of Us, which is a film that we make of the students in the school. And it's so powerful. And it's really a great way to develop cultural literacy and give everybody a sense of themselves. I mean, the discovery that kids have and what they do to claim their names, even if they're names that they don't like, they get to come up with a name they wish they had. It's a really wonderful time. And for me, it's a diagnostic on presentation skills.
So what kind of epiphanies came from the Healthy Start?
This year, I did it like I did last year in January, coming back to school. And, that new year, healthy start, fresh idea, students have to commit to 3 weeks of starting something or stopping something in their lives that relate to mental health and well-being. So a lot of kids worked out, stopped eating chocolate, stopped eating sugar, decided to eat healthier. Some students decided to learn mindfulness or yoga, and they get to decide on their own what they do. They journal 3 times, and then they create a project or a product that reflects their learning and growth over the time. And sometimes there are these epiphanies. And this year, my students decided to use some of the data management skills and actually track it on graphs. So the days that they worked out, or the days that they swam, or the days that they decided to have less screen time. And really, like I was blogging about it last week, it's a profound thing to give students choice, and not from your list, but from their own lives and the things that really matter to them.
Awesome.
I had one student realize how essential water was for his life. And he used it in a search for strategies to deal with his anxiety. And he decided as his product, the mandala, which is what we use when we meditate in the class, that he created in the shape of a water bottle. He's like, I tried all these things, and the thing that worked best for me was to take a few minutes and drink water. So here's my mandala. And I thought that was pretty incredible. We had another student who tried 3 different things, which I found interesting, but he tracked them so systematically. And what he learned was that when he reduced his screen time, not only did he engage more in his other interests, but he engaged more in his family, and he felt less isolated. So these are the kinds of things that my students are writing about and reflecting upon, but also sharing with each other. So everybody kind of has that collective experience and that, oh, cool. And it's amazing to watch.
Oh, that's awesome. What grades do you teach?
I teach grade 8 this year.
Okay, so these are 8th graders doing all of these projects. So what would you say the biggest mistake you've made as you've worked to try to create engaging projects?
I think the biggest mistake I ever made was trying to give the students choices from a list that I made. And I've noticed that over the years, the less I give them, like I'll give them a few ideas, but the less I give them, the more they bring to the table. I've learned that my best work is when I create the framework for students to bring their whole selves into a learning equation, and then they build the rest. So that's where my Bob logo came from. The image that I use is like the empty frame of a house, because if I can create a strong framework, what they bring is as individual as they want it to be. And it's like an architectural digest. It's incredible.
Wow. Noah, as we finish up, there's one other thing that I want to talk about. Many teachers who come on the show talk about the importance of relationships in having breakthrough experiences with their students. Do you agree or disagree, and why? Can you give us an example?
Sure, I profoundly agree. And I can tell you that through these projects, I develop relationships with the students that go so far beyond that laundry list that people have when they fill in the what are your interests and what are the things that you do in your spare time, things that a lot of teachers do at the beginning of the year to try to get to know their students. So the more I get to know them, the more I can play on that and really truly build a classroom that is going one-to-one to nurture each individual from where they are and move them on their own learning continuum. So those relationships really help me see the whole person and melt the iceberg of that individual to help make school a place where they can feel whole.
So teachers, we have lots of ideas here. Unconventional projects to get to know your students. Remember, it's still about relationships, but I love this idea of having, an 8-week project where the students actually select their own deadline. There's so much learning to happen there by creating somewhat of your own environment. That's fantastic. Thank you, Noa.
Thank you, Vicki. I'm so happy to have been here.
Here's your challenge for today. There is an awesome chat called PBL Chat on Twitter. Share your favorite project and what you're doing in project-based learning there or with someone face-to-face or online. Let's talk about effective project-based learning. So share your ideas.